The first thing Jim Carter noticed when he woke up was the smell. It was a unique blend of burnt ozone, fried circuits, and something that strongly resembled overcooked chicken. Given that his squad had been ambushed by a battalion of alien warriors, he doubted it was actual chicken. His head throbbed as he pushed himself up from the rubble, blinking away the red warning messages flickering across his helmet's cracked visor. The mission had been simple. Guard Outpost Theta, a small but strategically important research station on the edge of human-controlled space. Then, of course, the Graxian Empire had shown up, all tusks, plasma rifles, and a serious lack of indoor voices. Jim took inventory. Rifle? Missing. Sidearm? Present, but with only half a clip. His comm unit crackled with static, barely functional. And his squad? He didn't need a roll call. The silence told him everything. He exhaled sharply. Welp, guess it's just me. A guttural voice boomed from beyond the shattered walls of the outpost. Jim rolled onto his stomach and crawled toward a gap in the wreckage, peering out. The Graxians' hulking rhino-skinned brutes moved through the ruins with an air of smug superiority. Their armor was thick, their weapons heavy, and their patience non-existent. Jim counted at least 20 patrolling the wreckage, their commander, a particularly large specimen with a jagged crest on his skull, shouting at his subordinates. Find the last one, the commander growled. The human is weak. His kind always are. Jim smirked. Yeah? Well, this weak human still has a few tricks up his sleeve. He slithered back into the ruins, moving with the quiet grace of someone who really didn't want to get shot. His training kicked in, assess, adapt, overcome. He still had his combat knife, a few grenades, and an emergency beacon buried somewhere in the wreckage. If he could avoid a direct fight, he might just live long enough to call for help. Or at least long enough to be a massive pain in the Graxians' oversized backsides. Jim moved fast, rigging up makeshift traps with whatever he could scavenge. A loose fuel cell from a wrecked transport? That was now an explosive surprise. A stack of collapsed girders? A well-placed grenade turned them into a deadly avalanche. He didn't have to beat the Graxians. He just had to make them think he could. The first explosion sent a trio of warriors flying, their bulky armor doing absolutely nothing to stop physics from taking over. A second blast crushed two more under debris. The Graxians roared in confusion, firing wildly into the ruins, hitting everything except their target. Jim, wedged into a tight crawl space, whispered into his barely functional comm, "Hey, Command, if you're getting this, I could really use an orbital strike. You know, the big boom. Soonish." Only static answered him. He sighed. Figures. A shadow loomed over his hiding spot. Jim's hand went to his knife just as a Graxian soldier reached down and yanked him out like a particularly annoying weed. Jim barely had time to react before he was hoisted into the air, face to face with the commander. The alien's tusks curled in what might have been a grin. "You fought well for prey." Jim grinned back. "And you smell awful for a warlord." The Graxian commander's eyes narrowed. Jim's feet barely touched the ground before a fist the size of a sledgehammer slammed into his gut, sending him sprawling. He coughed, rolling onto his back, blinking at the sky. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone better." The commander stood over him, massive and immovable. "Human, your kind has always been weak. You cling to technology, to weapons. Without them, you are nothing." Jim wiped blood from his lip. "See, that's where you're wrong." He lifted his wrist, tapping the barely flickering emergency beacon attached to his armor. "Because I still have one more weapon." The commander frowned. "A broken communicator? That won't save." A distant boom echoed from the sky. Jim smiled. "Oh, buddy, you have no idea what's coming." Jim Carter had exactly 2 seconds of satisfaction before the Graxian commander stomped on his emergency beacon. The device sparked once, then died with a sad little bzzzt. Jim stared at it, then at the commander's massive, scaly foot. "Well," he muttered, "that's rude." The Graxian warlord, who Jim had mentally named Big Ugly, grunted, "Your toys won't save you, human." He leaned in, his breath a mix of burnt meat and whatever nightmares smelled like. You are alone, defeated. The Empire is inevitable. Jim gave him a lopsided grin. You rehearsed that speech, didn't you? Bit dramatic. Big Ugly snarled and yanked Jim to his feet like he weighed nothing. Around them, Graxian soldiers secured the outpost, stepping over bodies and wreckage like they were nothing more than decorative inconveniences. The remains of Jim's squad had been collected in a neat pile, probably for some sort of grotesque victory ritual. That thought sent a fresh wave of anger through him. These scaly bastards thought they'd won, that humans were weak, that he was nothing but a bug waiting to be crushed. Fine, let them think that. Jim groaned, sagging in the warlord's grip. Okay, you win. I give up. Big Ugly barked out something in Graxian, and the surrounding soldiers chuckled. Jim didn't speak their language, but he was pretty sure it translated to pathetic. Perfect. The moment Big Ugly loosened his grip, Jim moved. A sharp twist, a boot to the knee, and suddenly he wasn't the one being held. He was the one holding a stolen Graxian sidearm, aimed directly at the commander's very punchable face. The warlord froze. His soldiers, caught off guard, hesitated. Jim smirked. You were saying? Then he shot the nearest fuel canister. The explosion was immediate, sending a fireball straight into the sky and knocking everyone off their feet. Jim hit the ground hard, rolling with the impact. The Graxian commander bellowed orders, but Jim wasn't listening. He scrambled for cover, yanking his barely functioning comm unit free. Come on, baby, he muttered, slapping it twice. Just give me a little signal. The static crackled, then, repeat, this is UHS Valiant. Receiving weak signal. Identify. Jim almost kissed the thing. Instead, he pressed it to his mouth and whispered, Sergeant Jim Carter, Outpost Theta. I need immediate orbital fire support. Enemy forces, overwhelming position. A pause. Then, Sergeant, you are within the danger zone of orbital strikes. Recommend retreat. Jim peeked out from behind the wreckage. The Graxians were regrouping, forming a perimeter. Big Ugly was back on his feet, looking even more murderous than before. Yeah, see, that's the problem, Jim whispered. Retreat's off the table. So, unless you want me sending an apology letter to command in the afterlife, I suggest you start dropping big explosions right now. Another pause. Then, Sergeant, confirm your exact coordinates. Jim exhaled, glancing up at the sky. Somewhere up there, a human warship was just waiting to rain fire and fury. He just had to survive long enough for it to happen. He tapped his beacon again, hoping the busted thing still had enough juice to transmit his location. Sending now. EDA on fireworks. 2 minutes. Make them count. Jim grinned. Copy that. He stood, dusting himself off. Across the field, Big Ugly saw him and pointed. There. Kill him. Jim cracked his neck. All right, boys. Let's dance. The first shot came sizzling toward him, but he was already moving. He sprinted toward the ruins, using the debris as cover. A Graxian tried to cut him off. Jim slid low, slamming his stolen sidearm into the alien's knee, then finished the job with a quick shot to the head. One down. Dozens to go. Jim ducked behind a collapsed wall, counting the seconds. He needed to stay alive for just a little longer. Sergeant, 90 seconds to impact. The comm crackled. More Graxians closed in, moving with the confidence of soldiers who had already won. Jim spotted one with a radio unit and had an idea. Hey, Big Ugly. Jim shouted, popping up from cover. Want to know the best part about fighting humans? The commander roared, lifting his plasma rifle. There is no best part. You are vermin. Jim grinned. Wrong. The best part. He gestured upward. We always bring backup. The commander hesitated, just enough for Jim to shoot the Graxian holding the radio. The alien dropped, and Jim lunged, grabbing the device. He pressed the broadcast button, switching it to an open channel. Attention, all Graxian forces, he said, panting. I'd recommend running. Like right now. Big Ugly snarled. Lies. You are nothing. Jim just winked. In 5 seconds, you're gonna wish that were true. He dove behind cover. The sky roared. The first explosion hit like the fist of an angry god. A blinding white flash tore through the ruins, turning steel and stone into molten shrapnel. The shockwave ripped across the battlefield, sending Graxians sprawling like bowling pins in the path of a runaway truck. Jim Carter, already hugging the ground like it owed him money, gritted his teeth as the concussive force threatened to shake his bones loose. Then came the second strike, and the third. The Valiant wasn't holding back. Fire and thunder rained down in waves, carving massive craters into the earth. The air filled with the sound of roaring infernos and the high-pitched whine of Graxians screaming in a language that probably translated to something like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Jim peeked up from behind his scrap metal cover just in time to see Big Ugly, the Graxian commander, rising to his feet. His armor was scorched, his once pristine war banner now a flaming rag barely hanging from his shoulder. His expression was one of pure, unfiltered rage. Jim, on the other hand, was grinning like a man who had just successfully bluffed his way out of a losing poker hand and then watched the casino explode. "Nice night for fireworks, huh?" Jim called out, standing up and dusting himself off. Big Ugly turned to face him, his massive form silhouetted against the fires raging behind him. You would destroy your own battlefield just to defeat us." Jim rolled his shoulders. "Buddy, I'd burn down my own house if it meant taking you with me." The commander roared and charged, plasma sword igniting in his grip. Jim barely had time to react before the massive alien was on him, swinging the weapon in a wide arc. Jim dodged, but not fast enough. The blade skimmed his shoulder, searing through his armor and leaving the distinct smell of burnt fabric and singed pride. Pain flared up his arm, but Jim had fought through worse. "All right, you overgrown steak dinner," Jim muttered, rolling to the side and drawing his knife. "Let's dance." Big Ugly came at him again, swinging hard. Jim ducked, darted in close, and slammed his knife into the Graxian's side. It barely pierced the thick armor, but it was enough to make the alien grunt in surprise. Jim smirked. "Not so tough up close, are ya?" Big Ugly responded by headbutting him so hard Jim briefly reconsidered every life choice that had led to this moment. Stars exploded behind his eyes as he stumbled back, barely keeping his footing. The commander, still very much in the mood for murder, swung again. This time, Jim wasn't fast enough. The plasma blade slashed across his chest, sending sparks flying. His armor absorbed most of the hit, but the force of the strike sent him crashing to the ground. Big Ugly loomed over him, breathing heavily. "You are finished," Jim groaned, staring up at the sky, where fiery streaks from the Valiant's bombardment continued to paint the heavens. He could barely feel his fingers. His ribs were probably cracked. His vision was swimming, but he wasn't dead yet, and as long as he was breathing, he could still be a problem. Jim grinned, blood staining his teeth. "You, might want to move." The commander frowned. "What are you?" Then he heard it, a high-pitched whistle, growing louder by the second. Jim had spent enough time on battlefields to recognize the sound of an incoming final strike. Big Ugly, however, took a second too long to figure it out. By the time realization dawned on the Graxian's face, Jim had already rolled away, laughing through the pain. Then the world went white. The final orbital strike hit like a god, slamming the reset button on reality. The shockwave sent Jim flying, tumbling through the air like a rag doll before crashing back down into the dirt. He barely registered the impact, too busy watching as the very spot where Big Ugly had been standing was now nothing but a flaming crater. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Jim coughed, groaning as he propped himself up on his elbows. His comm crackled. Sergeant Carter confirmed status. Jim let out a weak chuckle. "Still here. Might need a medic. And maybe a sandwich." A pause. Then confirmed. "Extraction team en route." Jim exhaled, staring up at the smoke-filled sky. He had no idea how many Graxians had survived the bombardment, but judging by the complete lack of laser fire in his general direction, he was willing to bet it wasn't many. The Empire had come here expecting an easy fight. Instead, they got him. Jim let his head fall back onto the dirt, laughing to himself. Yeah, he muttered. That's what I thought. Jim Carter woke up to the rhythmic thump-thump of a medevac shuttle's engines and the distinct scent of burnt metal, fried circuits, and something that definitely wasn't chicken soup. His entire body felt like he'd been used as a punching bag by an angry sumo wrestler, but he was alive. That was something. A medic hovered over him, helmet tilted as she scanned his vitals. You're awake. That's surprising. Jim tried to sit up, but his ribs immediately filed a complaint. He groaned and slumped back down. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises. The medic huffed. You're also full of bruises, plasma burns, and what I think is a piece of alien armor lodged in your shoulder. She poked at something and Jim winced. Congratulations, Marine. You're officially a walking miracle. Jim smirked. Not the first time I've heard that. The shuttle shook as it entered the upper atmosphere, leaving the smoldering wreck of Outpost Theta behind. Jim turned his head, watching the once proud station now reduced to a field of craters, burning wreckage, and a whole lot of Graxian scrap metal. You really held that place, the medic muttered, following his gaze. Command says the Graxians are pulling back. They're spooked. Jim raised an eyebrow. Spooked? By what? The medic gave him a look, then gestured toward him. You. Some lone Marine called in the biggest orbital strike this sector has ever seen and wiped out an entire Graxian war battalion. The rumors are already spreading. Some are calling you the Demon of Theta. Jim groaned. Oh, come on. I pass out for, what, an hour? And now I'm a legend? 40 minutes, actually, the medic corrected. And yes. Jim ran a hand down his face. He could already hear the exaggerated stories that were probably forming in the mess halls. In a week, he'd be 10 feet tall, carrying a rail gun with one arm and eating Graxians for breakfast. In a month, they'd probably say he punched the orbital strike down himself. He sighed. At least tell me someone got it on camera. The medic smirked. Oh, don't worry. It's all over the fleet net. The best part? We intercepted Graxian transmissions. They're terrified. Their survivors are telling stories about the unkillable human who fought off an army alone and called fire from the sky. Jim blinked. Wait, they think I survived on purpose? Oh, absolutely, the medic grinned. They think you planned it. Like it was all part of some grand human strategy. Jim let that sink in. The Graxian Empire, a race of brutal warlords who had spent years treating humanity like an annoyance, now thought that humans were so dangerous that a single Marine could outfight an entire battalion and call in a precise orbital strike just to make a point. Slowly, a grin spread across Jim's face. Good, he muttered. The shuttle rocked slightly as they neared the UHS Valiant. Jim could see the massive warship in orbit, its gun batteries still glowing faintly from the barrage it had unleashed. As they approached the docking bay, his calm crackled to life. This is Captain Reynolds of the Valiant. A voice boomed over the speakers. Sergeant Carter, you're officially the biggest damn headache the Graxians have had in years. Well done. Jim coughed. Thank you, sir. Command wants a full debrief when you're patched up, Reynolds continued. And just a heads up, Marine, everyone wants to buy you a drink. Jim chuckled. That a direct order, sir? Reynolds laughed. Let's just say, highly encouraged. The comm cut out, and Jim leaned back, shaking his head. He had signed up for the Marines, expecting to serve, fight, and maybe get a medal or two. He had not, however, expected to become the nightmare fuel of an entire alien empire. The shuttle touched down with a soft hiss, the doors opening to reveal a crowd of Marines waiting in the hangar. The moment Jim stepped out, the entire bay erupted into cheers. Someone started chanting his name. Someone else held up a hastily scribbled sign that read, Hellfire Carter. Jim groaned. Oh, for the love of... Before he could protest, a flask was shoved into his hands. He sniffed it. Whiskey. Strong. A burly Marine clapped him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him over. To the man, the myth, the lunatic who called down hell itself, The crowd roared in agreement, raising their drinks. Jim exhaled, rolling his eyes. Well, if he was going to be a legend, he might as well enjoy it. He took a swig. The Valiant sailed through the stars, carrying the Marine who had turned an outpost's last stand into a story that would be told for generations.